In a world increasingly shaped by technology, the HumanUp imperative explores the significance of human connection with each other, with the communities we serve, and perhaps most importantly, with ourselves. Join Rex Wallace and his guests as they discuss the ever-important role of authentic, meaningful connection in healthcare. It's time to HumanUp.
Hey everyone, welcome back to the HumanUp Imperative. We've talked before about the importance of, or about the fact that cross-functional programs like Medicare Star Ratings that a lot of us are deep into are very human-dependent programs, and human interactions are messy and complicated. According to today's guest, that's not just okay, it's actually maybe ideal for our social and emotional development. In a book she co-authored, she shows how working through the inevitable friction of human connection is the necessary path to better relationships, even with work colleagues. So please join me as we human up with renowned pediatrician and co-author of The Power of Discord, Dr. Claudia Gold. Claudia, welcome to the show.
Thanks for having me.
I'm legit thrilled to be talking to you today. I'm a huge fan of this book, and we'll talk a lot more about that in a second. But first off, I really want people to get to know you before we get into the discussion. So can you take a minute and let our listeners know a little more about you and the work you do?
Sure. Well, I worked for about 20 years as a general pediatrician, and I was exposed to a kind of a world of knowledge and research that pediatricians don't generally learn about. One of them being Dr. Tronick, who's my co-author. And so after this practicing for 20 years, I went and was a fellow and then a faculty member on this early relational health fellowship training program, which opened my mind to a whole world of knowledge that was so relevant to my work as a pediatrician. And then I began to shift into being more of a writer. I've actually written 5 books in 15 years, and a teacher, although I do still do clinical work. So I get to be in intimate relationship with families with young children while also teaching and writing and speaking to a wide variety of audiences all over the world.
And our discussion today won't necessarily be about children, but since we're recording this the day after Mother's Day too, right? It is very relevant for all personal relationships, right? I mean, one of the key tests that the book was even based on, right? The still face test, right? It was so powerful in parenting and interpersonal relationships and period, but especially parenting. So yeah, if this is, we're talking mainly in a work context today, but what we're talking about today, just for our listeners, it's probably even more relevant for those personal connections, like with your kids and with others. And I do have to tell you, well, let's back up and talk about the book for a second. So before we get into like questions, can you maybe take a minute and talk about the book, how that came about with Dr. Tronick and this kind of concept of harmony and disharmony and repair?
Sure. And I think just to link it to relationships throughout the lifespan and in all contexts, really the infant caregiver relationship is the prototype of all future relationships. And so Dr. Tronick and I came at the book from slightly different places. I'll tell you where he came from first, which is that he was a researcher studying child development. And this was back in this late 60s, early 70s, where there was this kind of idea that parent-infant relationships were perfectly attuned, and it was this graceful dance, and that the infant was really a passive participant. And then he went on rounds with Dr. Barry Brazelton, also a renowned pediatrician, and he saw that actually from a very young age, infants have a lot to say about the relationship. And then he set up this experiment to test that hypothesis. And that is the still face paradigm, which you mentioned earlier, for which he is most famous. So in the fellowship, we learned all about that and how it showed that the infant really has a lot to say about the relationship. And then now I come from a very different place. So he's primarily a researcher, which is that I'm a general pediatrician and I am there when infants and parents meet each other for the first time, going to deliveries in the middle of the night. So very much immersed in the clinical world. And then I was his student and then one of his co-faculty, and he wanted to write a book describing the relevance of his infant research on relationships throughout the lifespan. So then, since I was a clinician but also a writer, having by that time written 3 other books, he asked me to co-author this book with him, and so that's how it came to be. And it was really, it is what it's about. So he and I, totally different people coming from totally different backgrounds, had to somehow manage to produce a book together, which was very messy and very imperfect. And I think what you'll see if you read the book, it is we ended up with quite a good product after a lot of messiness.
I completely agree. It was a great product, and the stories from your perspective and from his perspective are different, and all the different case studies that you guys give. But yeah, it comes together so well. I've obviously read it. I actually listened to it on Audible, or I would have a hard copy right here on display for us. But yeah, I can't recommend it highly enough for kind of all of your human connections. You know, and I do think it's incredibly relevant for work when we're working in cross-functional relationships. And I apologize, my dogs, I can totally hear them, Stefan, so they're going crazy. Okay, so Claudia, the book definitely left an impression, right? So this concept of you know, when I think of my relationships, and we'll just stick with work, right? There are, so I think the way you guys phrase it in the book is it's every human connection is a dance of harmony and disharmony, right? And I think the point in the book is something like 70% of the time that we make sure I get this right, but something like 70% of the time within a relationship, an intimate relationship or a close working relationship, 70% of it is some type of disharmony where we're not completely aligned in something. Is that high? Is that the right percentage?
No, that's accurate. So, but just
Yeah.
to tell you where the number comes from, it's from research with infants.
Okay.
So again, it's micro analyses of videotapes of typical caregiver-infant interaction. So they slowed it down so that they could see exactly when they were in sync or out of sync.
Right.
And so on average, and this has been reproduced in many different cultures all over the world, many different research settings, that on average, the interactions in a microscopic way are mismatched on average 70% of the time. But the key is that they are then repaired. So development proceeds in a healthy way when these mismatches are then repaired. So you're out of sync, then you're in sync, then you have another moment where you're out of sync, and then you rejoin. And so the idea is that this is, as I said, a prototype of all our relationships. That in this messy way, you don't quite get where the other person is coming from, but that you then repair it, and that's the repair that's the essence of healthy relationships, the capacity for repair, which is where trust and intimacy grow out of those repeated experiences of repair.
And that's what really stuck with me is sort of, you know, the part that we own in any relationship, right? It's easier to imagine with a parent and a child maybe, but with two coworkers who have to work together, or the leader of a team and the people on that team, or whatever the relationship might be between two people, just knowing and understanding that it is very normal for there to be times of mismatch, times of disharmony, you know, and I guess there's a spectrum there of like levels of, there might not be necessarily friction, but there's mismatch in there. And then the spectrum goes up to, hey, it's really bad between these two people. But knowing there's going to be the majority of the time, there's going to be at least some kind of mismatch. And
Mm-hmm.
The point being, um, ideally both parties being intentional about repairing that. If so, I'll go back to another study that I lean on a lot called the Drexler-Sibbett model. It's a team performance model. It's just showing that that people when people come together as a team or work together, they have to get oriented on a common goal. They have to build trust with each other before they really start trying to execute, or before they really start trying to work together to execute on some kind of strategy that they've come up with. They can maybe come up with a strategy together, but it's a different animal when you're trying to execute that, right?
Mm-hmm.
And until you've built trust with that person, you will probably never be able to really work together closely, collaboratively to execute that at the highest level. So this feels very relevant to me if two people are trying to work together, understanding there's going to be some disharmony between our relationship between us, but being conscious about repairing that relationship. I'm curious if you can you maybe paint the picture? What does repair look like, especially in a work setting, that people should be conscious about trying to create?
Well, I think I'm going to back up a little bit to say what has to come before there is possibility of repair, because the people involved, especially if there's one who's more the manager or the leader, uh, needs to approach the relationship from a stance of curiosity or uncertainty, and then realize that they may not exactly understand where the other person is coming from. So when people get into trouble is when they think they know not only the right thing to do, but what the other person needs to be doing. And so when there's space for what I call not knowing, or what we talk about as playing in the uncertainty, I'm not really sure where you're coming from. And you're two people. I mean, in any relationship, there are two people with their own separate minds, who need to somehow make sense of where the other person is. So if you approach a relationship from a stance of uncertainty or not knowing, then you can say, well, I didn't quite get that. And what did you mean by that? And can you explain that to me? Uh, and that's where you have the space for the repair. But if you just know and you're certain and you're rigid in your thinking, then there is not that space. And so therefore you can't have the repair.
That makes perfect sense. So essentially, yeah, creating that psychologically safe space, right? And if you are the leader, especially, and you have that, so if you are the leader, then you have the responsibility to create that space to make sure the other person feels like you're not pushing your will on them, but you're generally being curious to try to. Does it look different if you're peers, if it's two people, co-working
Well, I
on a
think
project?
I'll give you an example from
Okay.
our process of writing the book, which is where I remember this day very well, because one difficulty we had in writing the book is that Ed is an academic. So he writes in an academic way. And I needed to write a book that a lay person, such as yourself, could understand. And so one day he said, I think we need to have a chapter titled, I'm not going to remember, but it was like it was very, very academic. And my first reaction was like, absolutely not. You don't get this. You don't know how we can write, to totally reject what he was saying. But there was actually a tremendous amount of wisdom in what he was saying. It was something to do with the multiple ways in which one can heal. And so I had to kind of let go of my frustration and listen to the value of what he was saying to me, and then say, oh, okay, yes, but we need to say it in a way that makes sense to someone who's not in this field.
Right.
And then we ended up that it ended up being a really good idea, but it only because we had first that friction and that, moment of intense conflict, that then this good idea grew out of from the repair.
And if that repair is not happening, it's pretty obvious. Are there? I'm trying to. I'm imagining our listeners thinking, what should I be looking for to know if repair is not happening in an effective manner? Are there red flags or signs or that
Yeah,
come
I
to
mean,
mind?
I think we give an example in the book of a workplace situation where a person came in, a new person to an organization, had a lot of their own ideas, and the hierarchy was such that there wasn't really a welcoming environment for new
Mhm,
ideas. And so what you might see is that the person who's new and alive and vibrant with ideas becomes more withdrawn, less enthusiastic. Eventually they may quit.
mhm,
um, if they do not feel that their ideas are being met with I mean, they might not be right, but they have to, if they're met with a sense of value and curiosity. But if they're not, um, then people get discouraged and they lose energy. Energy kind of dissipates from the system.
yeah, that's I can totally picture that. It kind of makes me think of the other concept of emotional um emotional absence. So in the book you say there must be opportunities for repair. Emotional absence does not create them. Can
Mhm.
you describe that? So in a what would emotional absence look like in a work setting, and what can
Mhm.
leaders do to help foster a culture absent of emotional absence?
Well, I mean, I'm going to take you back to the original research, which is the still face.
Yeah.
People who, so that's an artificial setting where the mother interacts with the baby in a typical way and then doesn't move her face.
Mhm.
That's the literal manifestation of emotional absence, that you don't show emotion on your face. You have a still face. And that's very disorganizing to a baby, and it's disorganizing to an
Mhm.
adult too. And so the yeah, I think being emotionally present with your uh colleagues. Now, how you do that, that's I don't have a how-to manual
Mhm.
to become capable of being
Yeah.
emotionally present. Um I think just that's important. I was at a conference recently called Leading from Experience, about how using your own emotional experience in the work environment can be actually very useful, as long as you understand yourself well enough that you're not just imposing your own history of trauma on your poor employees, which unfortunately does happen quite a bit.
Right.
When these things are unconscious. But I think bringing your authentic self, I would say, if you have are in touch with your authentic self, then
Mhm.
to bring that person to your work relationships is how to be emotionally present.
Mhm. We, um, our organization is not huge, a dozen employees, but we've, reached the point to where, we've started conducting an annual survey of our employees, and we just went over it recently with our team. And, but I think, that feels like also a way just to get feedback from the team on leadership, right? And on the culture and um, on you wouldn't ask about emotional absence, but you would get that from the results from the survey, I think, right? Do you and I know you're mainly your day job is really pediatrician. You're not working with corporations to gather
No.
employee feedback or anything, but that feels like a natural step to help at least be aware of red flags and then show up for your employees and be present. Um what if what if what if only one person is seemingly intentional about the repair? Can the working relationship still be productive?
Yeah, that's an excellent question. And again, I'll use an example. When I was, well, I think I'll depersonalize it a bit. There was a course being taught,
Mhm.
and there was a person who was leading the course. And then, we live in an era in education where a lot of very highly emotional charged issues are coming up around inclusion, diversity, and different people in the group were had different levels of comfort talking about these very, powerfully emotionally charged issues. And the leader of the group was completely averse to engaging in the mess. Uh, so in an ideal world, this group of teachers would have engaged these very controversial, not controversial, but emotionally charged topics, and been honest about how they felt about them, what role they should have in their teaching. But the person, again, who was in charge was absolutely unwilling to engage in that, knowing that it would be difficult to have such a conversation. And it ended up that they were unable to teach the course because the complexity and the messiness was completely shut down by the person in charge. Um, so I don't know if that speaks to your question, but I hope that gives an idea of what it can look like in the workplace.
Yeah, and how important it is to. I mean, we've had a lot of these conversations over the last couple of seasons talking about human connection and the importance of showing up and and trust and respect. And we most of our conversations, we think of it in three ways, right? So our connection with ourself, our connection with others, and then our connection with the broader community.
Mm-hmm.
And some of the things you mentioned too, many of our clients, our organization's clients, are Medicare Advantage health plans. So they serve, elderly and disabled members. And
Mm-hmm.
for anyone in healthcare, it's a very sensitive topic, right? So when they have a healthcare issue, especially as we get older or are disabled, it's a really important part of our life, our quality of life, right? Is something we have transactions, emotional,
Yeah.
financial, everything every day in some capacity, usually, right? So it's a very sensitive um and sort of fragile area that we deal with every day. So we're talking largely about employees today, but we could easily, be talking about a health plan serving its customers or its members, and making sure you're emotionally present in those interactions with, every interaction with a member to make them feel it's the same dance, right? It's the same dance with an organization and a customer. Harmony, disharmony, and repair. And
Mm-hmm.
the good organizations have rapid recovery. They have rapid repair, service
Mm-hmm.
recovery, or in whatever manner. So just it's intuitive to some degree, but it still hit me really hard in the book because we don't, outside of customer service, where we talk about service recovery pretty often, I don't feel like we talk about work relationships, especially the importance of repairing them
Mm-hmm.
all the time. Like sort of this continuous state of repair, because there's this
Yes.
continuous state of disharmony, right?
Yeah. And I think that's really the most important point is that and this is where what comes from infants. It's a developmental process. Any
Mhm,
relationship is a developmental process. Even if you meet someone when you're 75 years old,
mhm,
um, in these sort of moment by moment interactions, you get to know each other, and you don't know each other at first. You're two, in a work situation, you're people who are, before you start working together, you have a whole life outside of that. So it just is inevitable that it will be a process over time to be able to connect with each other. And so I think when there's sort of a forced sense that everything has to be perfect from the beginning, that is a recipe for failure. So to expect that there is going to be a process over time as people learn to work with each other. And in that process is how, new ideas and healthy development for babies and healthy development for companies happens in that developmental process.
Mm-hmm. You talked earlier about I think you used the word rigid, which I know is in the book too. If like and I think so a work culture with rigid thinking that shuts down discord will fail to operate. And then you also say in the book, the only way to get out of this mess is to get into it. Right? So it's almost
Okay,
like,
so just to be fair,
yeah,
I
go
went
ahead.
back to the book and looked that up, and that was not me who said that.
Okay.
That was David Brooks who said that in an
Okay.
op-ed in the New York Times.
Okay.
And he was actually referring to the political discord
Yeah.
in this country. So I want to be sure
Sure.
not to
Okay.
take credit for someone else's words. But I
Thank
mean,
you.
I think the idea was that you see this issue, in many, many, many different settings. It helps make sense of a lot of things. That the only way to get out of a mess is to get into it.
Right. Especially with this, when, I don't know. I mean, it was, maybe that's the part that's counterintuitive, right? Is even understanding that there is going to be a lot of disharmony. You don't, and then think, the point being that you need that disharmony to really build trust,
Yes.
in a lot of
Yes.
cases. It doesn't necessarily mean that you create disharmony, or I guess that's where, so I know some people are thinking like, does that mean you don't create it, but you understand that it's going to come, and when it
No.
does,
Yeah.
you repair it as quickly as possible, right?
No. You don't need to create disharmony. I mean,
It's going to come,
it's
right?
just a part of human nature that people
Yeah.
don't exactly know where the other person is coming from, and then you again, this not knowing and curiosity and uncertainty about the other person is just an important stance to have. And then again, I keep going back to babies, but you learn a lot from
Sure.
babies. So Winnicott, who's a pediatrician, coined this term, the good enough mother. And people often misunderstand it and say, oh, well, you don't have to be perfect. It's okay if you're not perfect. But that was not the idea. The idea was that it's essential to not be perfect, that the misunderstandings are critical. So it's not just okay to be okay with mistakes, but you have to make. But I'm not saying you have to intentionally make mistakes, because
Exactly. Yeah.
you will make those mistakes, because again, by virtue of the fact that humans have their own minds and brains enclosed in their body, and that they need to have this kind of approximation process in order to feel connected. And so don't worry about making messiness, because it will be there.
It'll come. And then one more from the book. You say, I hope I got this right, capacity to be alone grows out of relationships with others. And while the ability to be intimate with others is rooted in the capacity to be alone. And so my thoughts here are, so I encourage clients all the time to spend time in solitude, right? Like when they're strategizing, when they're planning, when they're trying to even thinking through, like, what are my goals for this year, for the program, for the cross-functional program that I'm leading. Like, you really need to get inside yourself and spend some time, I think, in quiet, right? To let that come and lay it out before you maybe go start sharing it or getting feedback from other people across the teams. But you need that first. I believe I definitely benefit from it. Maybe everyone doesn't. Maybe everyone doesn't need it. But I'm bad about thinking that the things I need are the things that other people need too, and that's definitely not always the case. But So if colleagues find themselves unable to be transparent with others and trusting of others, this it seems to imply that they need to be comfortable with themselves. How do they
Hmm.
how can someone increase their capacity to be alone, which in turn would make them able to be more transparent and intimate with others? Do you have thoughts on that?
Okay. Yeah. Well, this is again a developmental concept. So that
Yeah.
idea of the capacity to be alone comes from our earliest relationships. But it's a parallel kind of thing. So that as a baby is with a caregiver, but that caregiver is not like on top of them all the time, exactly in tune with them, then their own sense of self begins to develop. So they're in the relationship, and that's where they develop a strong sense of their internal self in turn, and that gives them the capacity to be alone with their own mind.
Right.
So a baby who has not been in that kind of messy give and take will have less of a strong sense of self. And what you're describing for the healthy process in the work world is to be able to have a conversation with yourself where you say, now, what is it that I really want? Who am I really in this role? Um, and only then, when you're centered in who am I, can you then interact in this kind of uh, then the parallel messy process with the other people as you begin to get their ideas. So if you're not centered in yourself, it's very hard without, people have uh, feel hurt, they get angry, they have personal reactions, they act out things unconsciously if they don't have a strong sense of themselves. Now, I am not one to give advice about how to develop a strong sense of yourself. I mean,
Mhm.
that is a process, and if people are struggling, then that's a whole other question about how do you center yourself in your role. Um, you know, there are many different ways.
Yeah.
Climbing, going hiking, yoga, psychotherapy, other intimate
Mhm.
relationships. You know, so so your sense of yourself comes from a lot of different places, and there are many, many ways. If your sense of yourself is fragile and uncertain, this is where that chapter came in, and that's what's in the book.
Mhm.
It's a whole host of ways in which you can uh, heal from that. It's not just one or, one thing or another, but really an immersion in different ways of being that can bolster your sense of yourself if it is faltering for whatever reason, which is obviously beyond the scope of the level you're dealing on.
Yeah.
But that's the level I deal on,
Sure. Yeah.
as an infant parent mental health specialist. Um, so yeah, so it's complicated. I guess I would quote
Yeah.
my colleague, Dr. Tronick, the answer to your question.
Well, and as we talked about earlier, when we came up, even with the concept of this show, it was about, again, connecting with ourselves, connecting with others, and connecting with our community. And we've had some discussions, and I think this is one too, where you can kind of say that the it's the more we connect with ourselves, the more we understand ourselves, and kind of give ourselves what we need. And that you mentioned some great examples of getting grounded. Time in nature, going on a hike. Um, we've had Zen experts on here and talking about the importance of meditation or Zen for some people. For some people it's faith and prayer and things like that. But it's personal, right? But it's so important to understand what it is for yourself. And the point that we make is that when you do that, when you take care of yourself, when you can connect with yourself internally, it helps your other relationships, right? If you're having friction across, and I'll just keep it work related, if you're having friction across multiple work relationships, it may be a sign that you need to get grounded yourself, and it may be time to look in the mirror, right? And I mean, obviously, every dance is it takes two to tango, right? So,
Mhm.
we all play a role in those connections, and though we yeah, and I think getting grounded and understanding ourselves and connecting
Mhm.
with ourselves can greatly impact our relationship with others and how calm we are and how grounded we are and how we don't take maybe we don't take things as personal when we're grounded, right? And
Right.
it helps more
Right.
collaboration, more less friction,
Right.
more a better relationship. So
Exactly.
yeah. What have we not talked about? Again, knowing our audience, knowing
Mm.
these are people that work in an organization that have to work with other people that don't report to them and they're just trying to
Mm.
collaborate. It's really important that they trust each other, that they build trust, that they, understand there's going to be disharmony and they need to be intentional about repair. We've talked about that, but what are we anything else you'd want to leave them with?
Yeah, well, I wrote this book 6 years ago,
Yeah.
and I have subsequently written another book, uh, which so I would say my thinking has evolved on the
Okay.
subject to really put, and I've mentioned this throughout our conversation, to put this idea of not knowing at the center. That in any whatever situation you're in, however messy and complicated and upsetting it is to anchor yourself in curiosity, uncertainty, and not knowing. That's okay. It's a place of anxiety, certainly as a clinician and as a parent, it's a place of anxiety. As a team leader, it's also a place of anxiety to not know exactly where you are and what the other person is trying to do. But that is really kind of your superpower, whether you're a parent or a teacher or a boss, is to be able to be comfortable not knowing exactly what's going on, and let it kind of unfold, because then you have created the space for the repair. Um, and if you always have to know and you always have to have the answer, that in the short term, that alleviates your own anxiety as the boss, but it does not help to grow relationships or to grow an organization.
Yeah, I love that. And I need to know what that new book is, or I'll if you get into. So I gave a talk a while back last year at a conference, and we talked about sort of the concept was in one of the key programs that we advise on that we talk a lot about is Medicare star ratings, right? So, the point of the presentation was star ratings is not astrophysics, or it's not rocket science, right? But the point we were making is not that it's not complicated; it's very complicated. But astrophysics has certainty, and you were just kind of describing uncertainty, right? Like not knowing what's happening. We're in a time in our industry of lots of uncertainty, lots of federal regulations continue to change,
Oh,
and
gosh.
we don't know where they're going, right?
Yeah.
And astrophysics are based on certainty because gravity doesn't wake up one morning and just start behaving differently, right? Like gravity, you can predict if you shoot a rocket to Saturn, you can nail within a few seconds of when it's going to get there because you know the behavior of gravity and distance, etc., and rotation and orbits and all of that. We don't have that certainty. So I think what you say is so important for
Mm.
our listeners because they are facing lots of uncertainty. And I
Mhm.
think being okay with that
Mhm.
is something we talk a lot about, but things you can obviously do to prepare for it and to be prepared
Mhm.
and right to
Mhm.
make sure you are on top of it as possible. But you don't know what's going to happen, so we have to be okay with it. And I think that's a really important mental health topic for our
Yeah.
listeners too.
Yeah. Yeah, we're all talk about, community. We're all in this kind of stew together of uncertainty, which is hard.
Yeah.
Very hard. Yeah.
Where can people find you if they want to follow you or learn more about your work?
Okay. So I have a website,
Okay.
claudiamgoldmd.com. I do have Instagram, Child in Mind 24. I have to confess, I don't use it that much.
Okay.
Not a huge social media fan, but I'm also on LinkedIn, which I use more often.
Okay.
Claudia M. Gold. So those are a few options.
So we will post snippets of this episode on LinkedIn. We will tag your LinkedIn profile, and we'll put your website in the post as well.
Great.
Last question. What's one book everyone should read?
I thought about that for a long time when you sent that to me. And first of all, I'll be honest with you, I bristle a little bit because who am I to say what everybody should do? Because
Yeah, sure.
I will tell you a very influential book on me,
Okay.
which I read when I was in high school, which was a long time ago, was the book of Human Bondage by Somerset Maugham.
Okay.
And kind of, it's a beautiful depiction of what I was saying about the sort of messiness and uncertainty of life, creating your own unique path, which is beautiful just because it is your life. And so I love that book. And the other thing I thought of, which is a whole other subject that we didn't even talk about at all, but a book that was recently a movie, was Hamnet, which is about grief and
Okay.
loss. And I think that's another thing that I write about a lot. And I'm actually writing a new book, which is really about that subject, about the importance of processing loss in connection and healing. And Hamnet, I think, is a beautiful example of that.
Okay, I've obviously heard of Hamnet, but I didn't even know what it was about. I haven't seen that yet. So, okay, so we actually had.
I mean, the book is great, but the movie's great, but the book is also fabulous. Beautifully written book.
Okay, we actually had an episode last year on here about unacknowledged grief. Specifically, grief that people don't really. It's not public. People don't know about. It's not like someone died necessarily, but you're grieving something significant, and no one really knows, and people aren't bringing you casseroles to your house, right? There's no sort of social acceptance of it, so you just kind of go through it on your own. And but yeah, grief, such an important topic. I know even I've been trying to listen to more of Anderson Cooper's grief podcast, and it's such an important topic. Yeah, maybe we'll have to have another episode and talk about that at some point.
Okay, sounds good.
You mentioned your I think your newest book is about not knowing, is that right? Yeah.
Yes, the book I most recently wrote, not the book I'm writing now, is called Getting to Know You. But it's really, the target audience is people who work with infants and caregivers. So it's more of an academic book about early development and early relationships.
Gotcha. Okay. I'm sure a lot of our listeners that'll still resonate. Okay. Well, Claudia, thank you so much. I really appreciate you being on. I love the book and looking forward to reading more of your writing, but I really appreciate you being on, and thanks so much.
Well, thank you so much. It's great talking with you.
You too. Okay. Thanks everyone. We'll talk next time.